Good morning, USA, California. Good afternoon, Switzerland, Europe, wherever you are. I see people are slowly trickling in. Yeah, and I think this is a good moment to get started. So welcome to our second Fireside Chat here, organized by Swissnex in San Francisco. Today with two very special guests. I'm personally very excited for today's conversation. A few words about these fireside chats. We are finding ourselves in a moment of deep disruption. I think that's needless to say. Every aspect of our life has been touched, has been transformed, has been restricted. Sometimes also new opportunities came up. And we find ourselves in a moment of incredible acceleration of a movement and of a transformation that had been happening anyhow, the digitization of pretty much all aspects of our lives. Of course, one testimonial is this is that we are here together apart. We are here together virtually when usually we would love to do our events in person, but we also love the opportunity to be able to reach new audiences through that format. This series is a series of conversations where we match two thought leaders from completely different backgrounds in a conversation about this very moment of transformation, and where we think about the questions that we need to ask ourselves at the moment. We do not know any answers. I think we're all in the same boat here, but we can speculate together what the new future might look like and how we think we want to use this very moment to create a better future for all of us. So a few tech issues. All the attendees are muted. I will soon be joined here by our two speakers. There is a chat function on the bottom, a Q&A function. So attendees, listeners, you're very welcome to post your questions there at any time. I will weave them into the conversation if they make sense, and otherwise we will try to get to as many as possible towards the end in the last 10 minutes of the conversations after 30 minutes of moderated exchange with our two speakers today. Also, please note that this session is being recorded, so you can actually watch it afterwards as well. Okay, now on to our two speakers of the day. We are very happy to have here one of our early allies of Swissnex, Yves Behar. He is a Swiss designer based here in San Francisco, an entrepreneur, an educator. He's the founder and principal designer of fuseproject, which is an industrial design and brand development firm. He's also an entrepreneur, as mentioned. He's the chief creative officer of August, a smart lock company. He has, in his work, really emphasized integration of commercial products with sustainability and social good. His clients have included Herman Miller, Kodak, Puma, Swarovski, Samsung, Prada, and for the Swiss people here, Rivella. Actually, he is behind the design of the new Rivella bottle. One thing I find particularly interesting about Yves' work is his argument that the designer's role is to create products that are both commercially viable and contribute to social good. And I think that's a unique perspective that we love to hear about more. Our second speaker is Professor Michael Schaepman. He is a professor of remote sensing at the Department of Geography at the University of Zurich. And he's also the director of the University Research Priority Program on Global Change and Biodiversity, and vice president of research at the University of Zurich. His research priorities include Earth observation, remote sensing, spectroscopy, to measure biodiversity from space. So he calls himself a space scientist, and he'll tell us more about that. And here on the California West Coast, he actually collaborates with NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory since a decade now, and is the principal investigator for the ARIS project, the Airborne Research Facility for the Earth System project. So as you can see, two completely different backgrounds here in the conversation with me today. And I would like to start off by asking the two of you, what does your new normal or old normal look like right now? And I'll start with you, Yves. You are still muted. I think we need to unmute you. Yes, here we go.
Thank you, Gioia. And nice to be with you on the panel, Michael. so the new reality in California has been about, I think we're entering our 4th month of quarantine. So working remotely, homeschooling children, and generally being being both reactionary to the crisis, has been to the dual crisis that we have experienced here in the U.S. Has been kind of our daily work. And what's been truly extraordinary is how I feel quickly people adapted, whether it's my office, whether it's our partners and clients, whether it's third parties. We've all adapted. We continue to be creative. We continue to make presentations. We continue to take action in the world and collaborate, creatively build new things remotely. And so that's certainly a silver lining, is how, however painful and difficult at times this has been, we have adapted rather quickly and are still doing what we love to do.
How would you say the creative process has been impacted in the?
Being working on 3 continents, we're based in San Francisco, but we have we have partners and clients all over the world. We've already, for years, we've been working creatively remotely. We have some teams in different places as well. But I think this has now become the norm. And so we have added a few tools. We work on a platform that's attached to Zoom called Miro, which allows us to sketch together, to move a creative board across the screen, to make annotations, to do drawings, on top of other people's drawings. So the creative brainstorms can still happen, and what I have found profound is that in a way I have felt closer to my team, because I can see their home and their partners and their pets, and the disruptions of life that are happening there. And I feel like the fact that there's less formality, that life and work are really colliding, and I'm able to see it, I'm able to experience it with them. Less formality has created more humanity in the way that we interact and exchange ideas, and in a way have a view into each other's lives.
I love that keyword, or that key expression, less formality, more humanity. Michael, how does that resonate with you? And you're in a very different place. You're in Switzerland. Things are different there. You're obviously also in a very different field. We saw earlier a quick picture of your laboratory. What does your new normal look like, and what has changed?
Yes, thank you very much, Gioia. And it's a real pleasure to be on the panel with you, Yves and Gioia. So thank you very much for having me over. Welcome to everyone from Zurich. It's just before 6 p.m. here in Zurich, and we're awaiting a big thunderstorm. So don't worry if you hear interesting noise in the background. It's just a thunderstorm. So starting with the pandemic was very interesting, because we started all by believing it's not us, it's somewhere else. And then suddenly reality struck us. And then we had the lockdown, and everyone thought, oops, it's real. So it actually came to us as a surprise, and it was quite a different style of living during the lockdown. In particular, in Switzerland, as you know, we're not used to have a singular president deciding what's going on, but it's a classical negotiation process between the government and all the individual people. So the solidarity was probably the biggest learning experience I had, that people really followed the unusual instruction of a democratic government, which is not normally deciding for the country what to do, but negotiating it in a democratic process. Now, going back to, you referred to the new normal. Just a minute ago, the government decided that we all have to wear masks in public transport. So I think the day before today, we thought we're back to whatever normal it is, not the old normal, maybe a new normal. But now something like a second wave will most likely hit us and restriction come back. So we were all enthusiastic about our regained freedom to move freely around, which is now restricted again by measures which are absolutely understandable. But again, you know, limiting individual freedom. So in that whole process, it was very interesting to see how everyone individually behaved. For the university, it meant really a shift to going digital immediately. In particular in teaching, we were not extremely well prepared. We were well prepared, and all the teaching staff really did an excellent job in preparing digital classes. But we didn't account for one thing, and that struck me with surprise. I think we moved several hundred desktop computers from university office to home office, simply because a lot of people in the service units at this university still work on desktop machines. So when you go to your home office, they had to bring their own computer. It was safety reasons, protecting, you know, the data of the university. So that was a very interesting experience.
It sounds like a big infrastructure project as well. So what about your research though, Michael? Like, how is that being affected? And maybe to take that into the next question for both of you, what is the most important thing that you have learned in the last few months of lockdown? And also, what is it that you want to try to take into the future when we come out on the other side, whatever the other side is and whenever it arrives? But what is it that you want to really take along with you that you think has been a very valuable lesson of this moment?
I think the most valuable learning is we cannot replace social interaction. So you can partly replace it by using interesting software that helps you to talk remotely to each other. But at the end, in science, I believe the personal social interaction is a very important component. So I think the biggest learning is to balance this new hybrid model between working remotely and working, you know, individually together. There were no conferences the last few months, so I think we're missing on exchanging substantial parts of information in the scientific domain.
You're muted, Yves. Sorry, you're muted.
I agree with what Michael is saying there, but for me, I'll add that one of the important elements that I have found is in a lot of the reactive projects that we have done around COVID, around testing, is that now collaboration is more important than competition. And in order to really for businesses, for the world to react efficiently, you can't just think about your own business. You can't just think about your own enterprise. You really have to partner, and even more so since you don't have access to a lot of you know, typical resources as you may have had before. Of course, you know, this is a little bit contradicted by what we have seen from governments, especially the US and the UK, where the dual crisis has been mostly politicized instead of bringing us together, bringing us as different nations collaborating, etc. But I do think that the successful countries, we can see, you know, how the successful countries collaborated both internally and externally, and how that has led to much better results, you know, from a COVID standpoint. But I think, you know, before COVID, we lived in a world where competition was clearly what, you know, how companies and how, you know, how businesses felt, with each other. And I think collaboration has been really emphasized as really the way forward and the way to solve interesting problems. We've had a few projects that are COVID related, that are about COVID solutions, from ventilators to large site testing, etc. And clearly, people coming together, collaborating together on these, bringing different types of resources together in order to solve these problems has been a big a way that these problems get solved.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, because we are also in a moment where everyone faces, for once, probably the same threat and the same sort of external environment that makes us all feel equally uncertain. So we are also in a way pushed and forced to think about solutions together. And as you said, unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily hold true at the governmental level everywhere equally. But that takes me maybe to a next point, which is, how do you think that this crisis might affect our appreciation, or humanity's appreciation for, or maybe apprehension of, sectors like science, like the arts, or like government right now, or technology? All of those factors, which are so key right now to overcoming this moment in the best possible way, with the least damage possible. Mm-hmm. And again, I think we see different reactions there, but I would be very interested in hearing your point of view on that. Michael?
Yes, thank you. That's an interesting question. The crisis affected science dramatically. I mean, there was no experimental work possible, but still at the same time, we were in a global collaborative project to develop a vaccine against COVID-19. So how do you perform actually research while research itself, experimental research, has been locked down? So very pragmatically, for us, the biggest challenge was to keep up and running our animal testing facilities. I mean, all these vaccines are being developed using some sort of experiments. And if you want to develop something fast, you need to collaborate. So for the crisis affected us heavily. So I can give you a quick example. We have several journals. So we publish our papers in scientific journals that are printed by the big companies known worldwide. And many of these big publishers just said, we're not accepting any review papers anymore. A review paper is a paper that looks at several other papers and summarizes their findings. Why? Because everyone was basically locked down from doing experimental research. They had time to write up their recent findings or comparing literature. So the digital access to the base of literature, the corpus of literature we had, was basically allowing us to perform research. That, I thought that was very, very interesting, that we immediately switched to that different mode. But at the same time, we lost tons of experiments, fieldwork, everything that was not possible. So we definitely had to readjust. We also faced the fact that we see many, many more research proposals written to competitive funding sources like the National Science Foundation and others. People took the time actually in their home office to write these proposals. So the good thing is, I think we learned to focus on what's possible. And it was, in research, there was only a small fraction of everything we do in research was possible. I think that was a very, very interesting learning. We're now better prepared if, and let's hope this is not the case, a second pandemic will arrive.
I love the thought or the idea of focusing on what's possible. I think that's kind of the survival mode we all find ourselves in. And maybe back to you, Yves. Again, like, we are in this moment where we really, collaboration, as you mentioned, is key. Government and good government is key. Science, as Michael also highlighted, science is absolutely key for us to get us out of this mess, if I may put it this way. So How do you see that from the point of view also of California, Yves? Like, how do you think this might transform the way that we as a people in this country also appreciate government and science, or also technology, obviously? And I think Yves is frozen. So may I bounce the question to you, Michael? What do you think? Like, and again, here I think I'm here between worlds, right? Like, I'm Swiss, I work for Switzerland, but I'm based in California, and the responses that we have seen in the two countries, especially at the federal level, could not be more different. I think that's needless to say. So I think the way that we look at government and have felt guided by government and trust government is a very, very different one. Can you talk a little bit about how you have seen that unfolding in Switzerland, and how you have seen the role of leadership and in government develop in the last 3 months?
So in Switzerland, we are used to negotiate everything. And the democratic process would basically allow to negotiate everything. So if the government decides to have emergency law implemented, we are very suspicious what the government will decide. So certainly they took leadership, they took all the decisions necessary, and there's a huge discussion whether it was too early, too late, whether the government was properly listening to scientists, whether the scientists were coherent in their advice to the government. So this negotiation process still goes on, and I think we are in the post-pandemic phase where we still have to clarify the role of everyone. The role of everyone, whether the government has misused power, whether the scientists have done proper, coherent advice. So I think we are still in this process of finding out what is actually the best approach to such a pandemic.
Yves, now that we have you back, can I bounce the question to you?
Sure. You know, I think, you know, as Michael said, there is still discoveries every day on what is appropriate, what works, you know, what is the correct advice, what is the correct science, and so we're still very much discovering, you know, the both behavioral needs and scientific needs and social needs that come with COVID and with this crisis. What I have found interesting is, you know, for us and the numerous projects that we're working on, is how we are now looking at designed resilience. And, you know, in the systems that we build, in the environments that we work on, there's some imperatives beyond, you know, government intervention. Some, you know, moving towards a contact-free economy, for example, or automation becoming the new normal and becoming needed in so many different places, and solving the kind of problems that we need. And so, you know, whether it's we work on, for example, on exhibits and environments, and here, you know, we have kind of switch to, we believe people will come back together, will go see things and experience things, and yet we need to think of it as contact-free. That's probably better known anyways, when you interact in a public space, at a museum. You know, touch is something that people look for, but how do you do touch? How do you experience, manipulate an exhibit and the world around without actually touching things, for example? You know, I think in terms of automation, a lot of the startups that we have worked with and shouldered over the last 3 years have been robots, you know, robots for security. And for example, our partners at Cobalt Robotics have a robot that does security, moves about an office and makes sure that people have their badges. And now it can easily, because it has heat sensing, it can easily see just by scanning the office if people have temperature or not. It can also see whether people are wearing their masks properly, and just, you know, be more of a, rather than being an enforcer, be a concierge that drives around the office and supports the office. Obviously, it's a robot, so it's a very safe element to have move around an environment, for example. But some of the other technologies that we worked on, for example, LEQ, which is an aging companion for people who are older members of our society, having companions, having somebody who connects you with the outside world easily, who connects you with your family, who gives you quizzes and interacts with you throughout the day, obviously has been very important and actually critical for a lot of people who've lived in isolation all this time. So what I find interesting is how some things are really being challenged. The whole world of retail and has certainly been challenged. And on the other hand, there's a lot of very relevant technologies that have been made even more relevant and more appropriate by quickly adapting, quickly tuning what they do and how they do it to this new reality. And so we're thinking a lot about this notion of design resilience, and even a lot of the things that we're designing are 2, 3, 4 years out. But even then, I think thinking about resilience of the systems, environments, products, and experiences that we build is become a part of every project.
That's very interesting. And maybe back to you, Michael. I have a question. Since you are also the designated new president of the University of Zurich, hopefully to be confirmed very soon, thinking about the concept of designed resilience, which I think is very striking, how do you think that might apply in the university setting, in the teaching setting, in the setting of academia, where, as you mentioned yourself, social physical interaction still is so important? And do you think there could be an interesting way of collaborating with the design side of things, as we're also relaunching a little bit our systems that we will engage with once we go back to a normal that will be a changed normal?
I think it's a fantastic phrase, design resilience. I never thought about in detail about this phrase, but actually there's an important point, because I stress the importance of personal social interaction. And the question is, in how far can technology, resilient use of technology, actually replace or compensate for such, let's say, personal contacts? It's not the aim to replace them fully by technology, but technology and design make it accessible that we can use new technology. So I'm pretty sure, at this university, we have conventional lecture halls. We have, the teaching is 80% probably conventional, which means one person speaks in front of an audience. And we have lecture halls. The lecture halls by design shape a building. So when you design a lecture hall, it needs certain structural provisions that it can be built in that size and magnitude. So actually, the lecture halls basically shape the design of the building. And we never thought about whether a different form of teaching, like the English Parliament setting or others, actually help our students to learn what we want them to learn better. Now, it's a tricky term, because we always say also the teaching needs to be resilient. So it's an interesting question how design would be helpful in that. I'm pretty sure that we will learn much better to make decisions between, let's say, the conventional approach of teaching something by using advanced design. So I'm pretty sure that will give a large discussion. The pandemic gave us the chance to make an experiment which is very unusual. I mean, in a normal setting, we would never have shut down the university, right? It would be very, let's say, non-pragmatic to do so. So the whole experimental setup that we learned from the pandemic was extremely helpful to discuss all these things. You know, I do not have a clear answer, but I'm pretty sure we will have to look at that.
Yeah, and I think I can't remember who it was. Maybe you guys can help me, but there was a politician, I believe, who said, a good crisis shall never be wasted. This is a good crisis. I mean, this is proper crisis. Is it good? Is it bad? But like, I think we need to make it good by using it as this opportunity to accelerate reflections, processes, and thinking, to be prepared for the future and be more resilient as we're going through this. So maybe taking it to one last question from my end before we integrate some questions from the audience as well. And again, I encourage everybody in the audience to post your questions in the Q&A section here. I actually recently heard a professor suggest that as we deal with this crisis, we need lots of courage in every aspect of our lives, right? It does take some mental resilience to go through this, but we especially need the courage of imagination. The imagination to design a world that is more sustainable, more healthy, more egalitarian. So I would love to hear what your wildest imagination is for our post-COVID-19 future or post-pandemic future, which is always a pre-pandemic future, as we know. So I don't like that term very much, but what is your wildest imagination? And also, what do you think is your role in creating and building that future? Yves.
Well, there's certainly been a lot of realizations for a lot of people, you know, being at home, being with your family, not traveling, you know, as much or at all. And then looking outside, looking at the environment, looking at the animals, looking at, you know, just nature, doing better. I think one of the big realizations is, you know, is in real time. I think for the first time in our lifetime, we have seen in front of us a change for the better based on our level of activity. And I think all of those things are silver linings, that realizations that are important. And in many ways, hopefully we can take into a post-COVID world as a new set of, a new way to approach our busy lives. I think in some ways, remote work and a more distributed sort of city system that doesn't rely just on the city center and commuting to it and being stuck in traffic as we experience in San Francisco. You know, those are things that people clearly see as benefits and as progress. So the big question is, of course, we need to get back to some normal. We need to people need to go back to work, and people need to interact with each other, as Michael said. But at the same time, what is it that we can do, both as private citizens but also governments, to build on those silver linings, on those learnings that we have had.
Michael, you want to chime in?
Yeah, fantastic question. So for me, the imagination is that we will have a new definition of the future of progress. So before the pandemic, we saw, at least in my environment, it was normal to have 15 meetings a day, travel 6 times to conferences a year, and you know, basically saying that's the way how we have to live in order to secure the progress we want. But is that really the future of progress that we are looking for? So now we have actually a global experiment where we learned that, as Yves said, valuing more different values we probably forgot by not traveling so much, or by using smart technologies to replace some of our daily workload with smart technologies. So in my best imagination, technology will be supporting the future of our work and define technology as being extremely helpful for what we want to achieve, to give us more freedom for creativity and social interaction. So I hope that the crisis, and I'm pretty sure I will work toward that, will help to define the new future of progress.
I like that idea, the future of progress. I will now turn it over to the Q&A. We have several questions here, and I will start with a very broad one that I like. It's Margot asking that, and she's asking, how do you foresee the future of serendipity in this moment and moving forward? I guess that can go to either. Yves, you want to start?
Well, it was interesting in the first 2-3 weeks of COVID. It was really dramatic. There was so much uncertainty. People didn't know what to do. People felt very isolated. So every time I would take a walk, I realized that people were very eager to talk. People were very eager to have a conversation. And so it was quite interesting because I started to say hi to everyone. Everybody I would encounter at the beach or in the streets here, I would say hi, and they would immediately start to want to talk, want to express themselves. So in a way, I don't think this crisis limits the future of serendipity. I think serendipity isn't just the ability to be squeezed together in public transportation like sardines. It's just as much about how your psyche is ready to share and to be together and to have conversations. You know, sometimes, pre-COVID, it really feels like everybody is just in their own bubble and nobody cares about each other. Nobody interacts with each other. And in a way, I think there's two tendencies from this crisis. One is to suspect everyone, to be, suspicious, to be distant, to stay away from interactions. And the other is, well, now we know you can talk to people outdoors. You can have a conversation outdoors. You can have, and in a way, I have felt that in some ways there were more opportunity to come together and have those conversations with people because they needed it more, because we need it more, because we are social creatures, and we need others to feel like we have a place and we can have those conversations.
So sort of the suspicion versus connection. I mean,
Yes.
There is, in a way, we're taught to be afraid of others right now. They're potential sources of danger to us, yet we also understand we need to collaborate. And I think that was highlighted several times. I will put out one last question actually from the audience before we close here. This is a question from Julien. And he's asking, what might be the most fundamental and permanent impact on our work? Is it the fate of the physical office? Is it about the way that people will interact or collaborate? Is it about how we actually envision work per se? What are your thoughts on that? The permanent impact and fundamental impact on our work.
Happy to jump in. For me, the most important impact to our businesses and the companies we work on is flexibility. There used to be a sense that you had to conform, you had to come to the office, you had to be dressed in a certain way, you had to kind of shed, a little bit of your home life and personal life as you're there. And I feel that, today flexibility towards your workforce, towards your people, is going to be key and is going to be much more accepted. Working from afar, being able to sort of connect with people remotely, letting some people connect remotely, some people come in as they want, some people sometimes relocate because that's a different place or a new place is more appropriate for them, whether it's because of family, because they're taking care of someone. I think flexibility is not something that a lot of businesses demonstrated very well before. Work felt very, very structured and sometimes very formal. And I think we need to, as businesses, we need to adapt to having much more flexibility towards people's needs and people's life-work balance. I think that will define HR policies and how how successful businesses treat their employees in a flexible fashion will be key in the post-COVID era.
That's interesting. Michael, how do you think that flexibility mantra, if I may put it this way, might impact education, teaching, schooling?
So flexibility is actually what you need to have as a character when you're in science, because things are moving so fast. You need to adapt to everything that emerges in order to make sure you keep on to being upfront and invent something new. Now, flexibility is actually something that every researcher needs to have, at least in his mental thinking and the way they perform research. For me, also a huge outcome of the pandemic is, and Yves mentioned it before a little bit, collaboration is more important than competition. So collaboration has led to the interesting situation that in our domain, open science is getting a huge push. Now, open science, just to explain for those who are not aware of that, is if you go to a publisher's website and you want to download a paper on COVID-19, if you're not at the university or not in an institution, you need to pay for it, even though it has been paid already by tax money before. So the publishers exhibit a lot of generosity by saying you can download them for free. But many scientists totally disagree with that model and team up and say, let's develop the vaccine for COVID in an open science fashion, which means make it accessible to everyone. And we see huge data sharing efforts at the moment where scientists before were working individually and not sharing data. And now you see an increasing amount of scientists that decide for their own career, it's more important to have a sharing attitude, work towards open science approaches than before. I think that will be a real breakthrough.
Which brings me a bit back again to the idea of suspicion versus connection, sort of the tilting towards the connection, tilting towards the openness to collaboration more. I think that's a very hopeful outlook. And one last question from the audience here, from Ines. What do you think are the industries that are going to thrive in the recovery, and which ones do you think are going to fall? If you're muted.
What I have found to be really interesting, and this is really the environment of startups that have taught a lot of us this, is that quickly adapting your business to these new conditions is probably just as important as what has made you successful, till today, or more important, as we call it, the pivoting to a different way of operating has really shown, who can do well and who is clearly getting, very hurt in these times. Even sort of conventional businesses like restaurants, for example. I have some friends who have restaurants that are mostly over-the-counter restaurants, and they're very sort of have a close neighborhood and community around them. And they're telling me their order levels have stayed during COVID at the same. Their business has been really the same as it was previously. And then, I have friends who have restaurants that are, big sit-down rooms and more traditional type of environments, and those are obviously have been very much hurt. So when I think about retail, when I think about entertainment, restaurants, even the arts in some ways, these are very deeply impacted by not being able to come together in a space, in a room. And at the same time, the pivot, how you continue to engage your audience, how you continue to provide them with knowledge and art or practical things to purchase, or ways to ways to access food, and that's really, the pivot has really been is really more important than ever. So whether it's a large business, whether it's a small business, the ones that I have seen really succeed are the ones who have exhibited creativity, and who have been, able to quickly react to this new reality and hence survive. I think the ones that are in most danger are the ones that are slower to change, slower to adapt.
Yeah, I think that's a good note to end on, the importance of the pivot, flexibility. I will do a quick recap, and then I'll ask you guys both a last, slightly more personal question. But to recap a little bit what I heard coming out here today, we talk about less formality in this crisis, which leads to more humanity and the possibility and the opportunity of collaboration, which is more important than ever. Collaboration that trumps competition in a potentially new world after this crisis, where we might not look at others with suspicion, but we recognize the connection that we have between each other as humans, as countries, but also as businesses. And the opportunity that lies in opening up, whether that's in the field of science or in the field of business, but the importance of opening up and understanding that together we can work better and build the better solutions in a more resilient future. Designed resilience, you mentioned that, Yves, but we also heard about teaching resilience, the importance of teaching, being resilient through time changes, the flexibility required on the side of researchers to adapt at all times, but also the flexibility of businesses now as workplaces, as employers, but also as actors in our environment, to be able to meet the needs of both the people we employ, but also the people we serve, and that importance of the pivot. So I think this has been a really interesting conversation for me. Thank you both very much for engaging with very different point of view. And before I end, I would like to ask each of you a very simple question. What brings you joy these days? Michael, you want to start?
Well, what brings me joy is the creativity I see that emerges from the pandemic. So you can see the lockdown as an intermediate state of being frozen, and we're re-emerging from this frozenness into a huge creative energy. I think it's our responsibility to make sure that this huge amount of energy that is currently freed up is used in a positive fashion to bring us forward. And I think just this idea itself brings me everyday joy, because you can see how much creativity is emerging everywhere.
Beautiful. Yves?
Well, I could have answered the same thing. Being in the creative fields, that certainly has been something that has brought me a lot of joy, which, for a while, for maybe the first 2 weeks, I was like, so what are we, how can we contribute? Do you feel a little bit sidelined? Do you feel like your abilities and your talents are being underutilized? But then when we started to work on problems, COVID testing, as well as vaccine brands, as well as a ventilator, which we actually just finished with Mass General, and that's going into production. Suddenly you feel that energy again of, oh, there's value, in my contribution. There's value in my work, and so I think, for me, what brought me kind of happiness and excitement, before, was always change. My motto as a designer is design accelerates the adoption of new ideas, and there's important new ideas out there that we need to push for. But I felt back then a lot of resistance towards these new ideas, because it's always easier to go with what already exists, right? And as a designer, you're constantly pushing against that resistance. And what gives me pleasure today is the fact that change seems to be something that we all have to go along with. And because of you know, again, the dual crisis of COVID as well as POC minorities persecution has really brought people together and saying, okay, this is it. We need to evolve. We need to change. There is no, you know, we need to nurture this future, and that will be, it will be better, and it will replace, you know, the past and the way we used to do things, whether it's in institutions, whether it's public or private or business. And I think that's really what gives me pleasure, is this opportunity to make bigger changes, fundamental changes, both personally in, you know, how we work, how we interact with the people closest to us, but also I think on a global level, how everything can be looked at anew and can be rethought with better ideas for us as individuals, but also for the environment and you know, for the planet.
This is perfect. I don't think I could end this any better, other than resuming it by saying never waste a good crisis. I think it was Winston Churchill. Thank you, Michael, for reminding us of the author. And thank you both very much, warmly, really, for engaging in this conversation with us, with Swissnex. To the audience, please know that we have a next Fireside Chat coming up on July 15th. We will be talking to Thierry Duvanel from Bühler Group. He is working in innovation there, as well as Ajay Chander from the Fujitsu Labs here in San Francisco, who is also head of a research group there. And we really look forward to a conversation that will take us probably in very different directions again. So thank you both very much, Yves, Michael, for being here with us today. And I wish you all the best as you make the best of this crisis and move the change forward that is so direly needed in this world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gioia. Thank you, Yves, for sparking design resilience. I will pick up on that and contact you.
Great. We should collaborate on that for sure.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Gioia.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, audience. Bye-bye.